The other day, I was in the car with my boyfriend, headed out to dinner in Washington, D.C., and we were running about 15 minutes late to our reservation, as per usual. For those of you who have never experienced DC driving, consider yourselves lucky. I'm not kidding when I say Allstate ranks DC as the city with the worst drivers in the country. There is always terrible traffic, and it feels as though there are speed cameras on every street. So anyways, we were driving in the middle lane and we continued to hit red lights, pushing back our ETA. There were at least 20 cars around us and not a single one was using the furthest right lane. If you know me, you know this is complete agony. I finally asked him, "Why aren't you using the open lane?" He looked around and said, "I don't know. I didn't think we could. I was just going with the flow." That's when it hit me. All of these cars were doing the same thing, just going with the flow and following the cars in front of them. Perhaps they thought there would be a parked vehicle or some sort of obstruction in the other lane. Maybe they assumed since no one else was doing it, something must be wrong. They could have simply been ignorant to the fact that there was another lane, or maybe they were just along for the ride. Whatever the reason, I was intrigued by this phenomenon. We've likely all been told at some point or another to just go with the flow. According to Oxford Languages, to go with the flow means to be relaxed and accept a situation rather than try to alter or control it. In other words, to follow the status quo or choose the path of least resistance. Now, as I was sitting there in DC traffic, very not relaxed or accepting of the situation, I started reflecting on what it means to go with the flow. Why are we taught as a society to go with the flow when we know that every single leader, movement, and organization that has ever wanted to create greatness has had to confront a given situation and introduce change? I was struggling to think of something that I could talk with you all about today that would be meaningful and resonate and authentic to my story these past 22 years as I've recently graduated from college and hoping to inspire some of you as you consider what's next after high school. I realize that many of the significant moments or achievements of my life, pursuing a degree in computer science as one of 17 girls in my department, taking an academic leave to travel throughout Europe, and starting a business in college were the results of intentionally not going with the flow and instead challenging the norm. So today, I'd like to talk with you about ways we can each consciously dare to lead and not follow, and change the narrative to encourage going against the flow. But first, I'll share a quick story about my journey to becoming an entrepreneur and how my path has evolved. So after I graduated from high school, I decided to attend Colgate University, where I had planned to study neuroscience. I was always encouraged to get my degree, work hard, and get a good, stable job. A few weeks into my freshman year, I found myself mindlessly going through the motions. I was waitlisted from my Introduction to Neuroscience class and was instead enrolled in geocaching and stagecraft, paying a casual $30,000 each semester for tuition. I was also working at the dining hall part-time to make some extra money on the nights and weekends. I was doing everything I was supposed to do, but things felt very stagnant. I began to question my why. Fast forward a few years and things looked entirely different. Towards the end of my freshman year, I started a digital marketing agency that has grown to support a full-time team working with top brands globally. I would commute back and forth between class and exams to meet with clients working with over 85 different businesses. I remember one time I left an exam and drove straight 2 hours to Rochester, New York to my ribbon cutting ceremony for our new office. Then as a sophomore, I switched my major to study computer science and actually helped launch a travel application that premiered on Shark Tank. Going into my junior year, I took an academic leave and rented a short-term Airbnb in Lisbon, visiting 19 different countries when I was 19 years old. This is all to say that my 4 years at Colgate University, I certainly couldn't predict, and they weren't exactly typical. And that was okay. In fact, by creating my own path, I found a way to differentiate myself, save money, generate income, and learn so much more about my own interests and passions. It certainly wasn't the easiest route, and I remember peers and even professors being critical of my decisions, but that never discouraged me from trying. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I realized going with the flow isn't necessarily a bad thing. And there are many times in my life I continue to go with the flow, but it can be blinding and limiting if we habitually take conventional wisdom as given. And it can be especially dangerous if we establish a groupthink mentality and fail to keep an open mind and perspective. So, how do we each recognize routine acceptance of traditional norms and constantly seek out better solutions? I believe it's with 3 C's: clarity, curiosity, and courage. First is clarity. Clarity in our own goals and priorities, and clarity of the world around us. We can't do everything, so we need to focus our efforts on specific goals and how we want our futures to look. Then we can identify flaws in the current system and recognize barriers on our individual path to success. I recently came across this interesting statistic. Millennials, or those born between 1981 and 1996, make up the largest share of the US workforce, but only hold about 4.3% of total US wealth. When baby boomers were roughly the same age as millennials are now, they accounted for about 21% of America's wealth, almost 5 times more. So millennials and Generation Z are struggling with increased living costs and increasing student loan debt. How can we change this statistic? By thinking outside the box. And that's just one example. Whatever your passion is, wherever you can make the biggest difference, I challenge you to see if there's a preconceived notion held by industry or society or the local community that is limiting innovation, equity, and progress. Now, this seems like a relatively easy thing to do. Recognize that there is a clear need for change. So, what's more important and what separates the great leaders is their ability to act on them, stay true to their values, and understand why things are the way they are in order to affect change, which brings me to the second C, curiosity. There is a great quote by Navy SEAL Brandon Webb. Conventional wisdom is not always wrong, but it is always suspect. I was recently hosting a podcast episode with Jeff Nicholson, who is the former CMO at VaynerMedia. He shared that he refuses to wear a tie because he never understood the tradition of tying a black knot around your neck just because someone told you to. Even at his own wedding, he refused to follow this standard convention. At first I laughed, but the more I thought about it, the more I started to think about the large number of widely accepted daily norms that are never questioned. For example, why do most Americans work from 9 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. at night, just out of routine? Adam Grant famously shares a study which shows that an employer can predict the performance of their employees simply by noting which web browser that they use. Firefox and Chrome users significantly outperform Internet Explorer and Safari users. The reason is not due to a technical advantage, but the fact that those employees who took the time to install new software have a different way of thinking, to be able to stray from the default. This curiosity to seek new information and explore other novel possibilities with a deep understanding is critical. It's one thing to identify the problem, and it's another to understand why things are the way they are and do your due diligence to explore the other options. And that leads me to courage. I believe the hardest skill to master of these 3 is courage, but to overcome the fear of failure and the fear of judgment. All of us like to talk about success, but few of us would like to talk about failure. Winston Churchill once said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it is the courage to continue that counts." To take action, speak up, and stand out requires continual resiliency to keep moving forward. Failure is inevitable. Judgment is inevitable. But we can't let this paralyze us. Instead, we can embrace it by shifting our mindset to believe that it is better to walk alone than to walk in a crowd going in the wrong direction. We can feel more courageous by building confidence, which stems from a clear vision and carefully considering the metaphoric third wide open lane. Just as fear can be a deterrent, fear can also be a motivator. Seth Godin says, "Going with the flow is a euphemism for failing." If you have an idea you'd like to pursue, but are scared to try, consider this. The chances not taken are the biggest failures. don't go with the flow. Thank you.